Hello, and welcome to the Urban Tree Festival, indoors. Of course, we had planned to do all kinds of walks and talks from the Bell House at Dulwich College to the Horniman Museum the same week as the Chelsea Fringe. But circumstances being what they are, we're going to try to bring you a little bit of nature in the day and night. I'm Gerit Quealy. I'm the author of Botanical Shakespeare, and the Urban Tree Festival brought me in to add another layer. We call it the Bard's Brain Body Boost because we learned last year at the Beaver Castle Flower Show through the Woodland Trust that freshness you smell when you go outside and go, oh, is phytotones. The trees emit them, plants emit them, and they boost your immune system. So we know sunlight helps, and just being around plants, sometimes even just looking at them, can help you feel better and help your body work better. And the bard, as we know, sharpens the brain, sharpens the memory, helps all kinds of things having to do with those synapses. Put them together, a little nature and Shakespeare, and you've got a brain body boost. And hopefully a lot more fun and layers of things going on. And sort of putting a little history and plots, characters, subplots, all kinds of things in your nature walk that you might not have thought of before. So since we have to do it from a zooming point of view, I thought we'd add a little Sherlock to the Shakespeare and go stalking a few trees. Today, it'll be the medlar. If you don't know what a medlar is, you'll learn. And if you already know, hopefully you'll learn a little bit more from an expert, a London girl who moved to Norfolk to start her own medlar orchard. Now there's a calling, and she has wonderful things to say. I hope you'll enjoy it. Ask us questions afterwards, send us emails. We'd love to answer all your medlar questions, and a few surprises as well, I hope. We'll see. Come along. Hello and welcome. We are going to be talking with Jane Steward. What a perfect name for what you do. You are the steward of the medlar tree in England. Yep. Would I am fair to say, so Jane has an amazing orchard in Norwich, correct?
Norfolk.
Norfolk. So would you say that you are the foremost expert on medlars in the United Kingdom at this point?
Oh my goodness, Gerit, that's a great question. I think that only a fool would claim to be an expert on anything to do with gardens or trees or plants, because you never, ever stop learning. What I would say is that I've got a great deal more knowledge than I had 4 or 5 years ago. And the longer I do this, the less I feel I know. Although people do contact me and ask me questions about the problems that they're having with their medlar trees. So in other people's eyes, there seems to be some experience and expertise here, but I would not claim to be a foremost anything other than enthusiast.
Well, that's very Shakespearean, that answer, I have to say. And certainly wise in that the more you know, the less you realize you know.
You pick up a great deal of information in a soft way, if you like, from getting to know other medlar tree owners. They might have 1 or 2 trees in their garden, and they, if you like. So I share my experiences. I mean, one example is that last year, and I'm still not 100% sure why this happened, but a large number of my trees were vandalized by pigeons in the first half of April. Now, we'd had a really dry and very hot February. And then we had, in the surrounding fields, we had absolutely no oilseed rape growing. And pigeons love oilseed rape. It's a member of the brassica family, which is their top favorite food supply.
It's where canola oil comes from, actually. I teach a little class on that. But let me interrupt you. First of all, are you walking through the garden right now?
I am.
And here's Jane and her husband giving voice to a little medlar in her orchard with Rosalind and Touchstone from As You Like It.
Truly, the tree yields bad fruit.
I'll graff it with you, and then I shall graff it with a medlar. Then it will be the earliest fruit in the country, for you'll be rotten ere you be half ripe, and that's the right virtue of the medlar.
Okay, so we're in the midst of the medlars, and you said an interesting thing with the pigeons because this is for the Urban Tree Festival, and so perhaps any urban medlar would have a problem with attack by pigeons.
It could, and my top tip, and I've got 3 of them in the distance here, my top tip, based on something I heard from a Cambridgeshire farmer, is to plant decoy peas.
Okay, we're getting a little twangly there. So twangly is from The Tempest, but I'm going to need you to, okay, now we can see you again. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll stay closer this way. Pigeons love peas, and farmers around who want to protect their crops from pigeons will plant peas as a sacrifice to the pigeons. So for an urban gardener, if they had any kind of problem with pigeons eating medlar leaves or any other fruit tree leaves, plant peas.
Okay, I'm just going to say that's a that from Love's Labour's Lost, where Barone says he picks up others' wit as pigeons' peas. So this is, isn't that amazing? So this is the reason why I say, first of all, Shakespeare is always relevant. And combining Shakespeare with nature, we work on this thing called the brain-body boost, because we know that Shakespeare sharpens the brain. It's better than Sudoku puzzles. And nature feeds the body in more ways than just literally with food, but also with these things from phytotones we learned from the Woodland Trust that actually boost the immune system. So a little Shakespeare and a little outdoor nature gives you this holistic kind of healing situation, a brain-body boost, we call it. But the we wanted to focus on specifically because it's a fruit, it's a tree, flower, and it's very rarely known. And the oddity to me is that I thought all British people, obviously I'm American, knew of the medlar, but I know Shakespearean people, so they know of it because it appears in 4 plays. However, even British people I found didn't, and Americans have no idea at all. The Folger Shakespeare Library did have a medlar tree, but they can't seem to locate it now. We're still working on that. And there are very few, so I have taken to getting little maiden medlar trees and giving them as gifts to repopulate the United States with medlars, or not even repopulate, populate. But did you find this to be true, that even British people don't know what it is?
Absolutely. In fact, there was a survey done a couple of years ago about endangered foods in the UK, and the list included such delights as semolina and tapioca and tripe, but it also included the medlar. And the survey revealed that 93% of Brits didn't know what a medlar was, and certainly hadn't tried one. But the encouraging news was that nearly half of the people surveyed said that they would be interested in trying the fruit. So I thought, well, let's carry on with the planting, and we'll keep talking about it and find some additional ways to encourage people to enjoy it.
So if we're talking about urban trees, I happen to know that there are a cluster of medlar trees behind this fantastic bookstore, the Book Barge, called Word on the Water. It's on the canal behind St. Pancras and King's Cross. I just happened upon them and I was so excited because they flower and they fruit. Where else might we be able to find them in an urban setting in London or Greater London?
Well, I think that there's definitely a good example of an very established medlar tree at the Bell House in Dulwich, which is southeast London.
And that's where we're going to start the Urban Tree Festival. So I'm brokenhearted not to meet the medlar yet.
Well, historically, they would have had medlars growing in the grounds of Westminster Abbey. In fact, that's one of the first examples of medlars in cultivation in England in the 13th century. The monk gardeners, isn't that a wonderful description for somebody's job? The monk gardeners at Westminster Abbey looked after well, the feeding of the community and probably the local population as well. And they definitely had medlar trees that were providing fruit for the community. We have no records, and we have looked and looked and looked and looked and looked. We have no records that go back to a time before the 13th century. And the first records that we found were this example of Westminster Abbey, and the second example is at Wells Cathedral in Somerset, where there was the Bishop's Garden with a very fine example of medlar, and they still have medlars there. They're not the same ones, obviously, because medlars only live about 300 years. So the tree there, but they outlive the apple, which is a veteran at 100. So they do a good job. They're very tough, and the wood is extremely tough.
So let's talk about how somebody might recognize one in the wild. I remember you saying that they have interest all year round if you want to plant them. So
yeah,
somebody recognize them in the spring?
In the spring, well, I will walk over to one and I will show you.
Perfect.
The medlar has a very different sort of leaf. If you look at this, it's not as glossy. It's certainly nowhere near as glossy as the pear.
It's quite long and
long tapered leaves, and in fact they almost have a downy quality. The other thing I'd say, Gerit, is that whereas the apple blossom is the first thing you see on an apple tree and the first thing you see on a pear tree, first thing you see on a medlar tree is the leaves.
Okay.
So they leaf up first. That's what happens really in the month of March. It goes quite quickly. They go from being in tight bud all the way through to being fully open by the early part of April. And as I was showing a minute ago, here we are. We've got an example here of, can you see that, the bud?
Yes, yes.
Okay, now that is just beginning to peep out. That has been in a tight bud formation now for weeks and weeks. And we're getting to the point in the year, I can tell from my mulberry tree, that we're going to have no risk of nighttime frosts. And the medlar flowers like to make sure, I think, that they appear ready for pollination when there is much less risk of an overnight frost.
One of the things that we're trying to do is with the Urban Tree Festival is, first of all, the Tickle Me app was developed so you could sort of map the trees in your area. I thought it would be fun to do a sort of Sherlock and Shakespeare situation where you map a particular tree. So we have the Bell House. I remember before when we spoke, you mentioned possibly Richmond would have other trees as well.
Oh yes, Ham House at Richmond has definitely got a medlar tree. That's sort of on the outer edge of London, but still counts as London these days.
Now we go to the wilds of Pennsylvania, where actor-playwright John Augustine is with his brand new medlar starting to bloom, giving us a little Mercutio from Romeo and Juliet and what he has to say about the medlar. It's very naughty.
If love be blind, love cannot hit the mark. Now will he sit under a medlar tree and wish his mistress were that kind of fruit, as maids call medlars when they laugh alone. Romeo, that she were, oh, that she were an open arse, and thou a popper and pear.
You would tend to find them, I would expect, in two situations. One is a situation where somebody is a keen gardener, someone like Nigel Slater, the food writer, who you may have heard of. He's mad keen on medlars, and he has a medlar tree in his urban garden, which is probably no longer than 60 feet, okay? Yeah. And because they are self-fertile, you can have just one on its own. And because you can choose the rootstock, you could choose to have quite a controlled size of tree. So if you didn't want it to get taller than 12 feet, you can make sure it doesn't by a choice of rootstock, and also by, frankly, pruning it. Although you don't need to prune them. And in fact, their growing habit is so quirky and gorgeous. They're all elbows and double joints, I always think.
Well, if we were walking around in a park, so in the spring they've got these beautiful white blossoms, and then what would we look for? How would we find them in the summer?
In some ways, they're least remarkable because you've got the maturing green of the leaves, and the fruit will have set, and the fruit starts out, you know, quite small, maybe not much bigger than a crab apple. I mean, really quite little, maybe half an inch and at the most an inch across. And by July, you will have a very clear sense of how many fruits there are going to be on the trees, and they will look like a cross between a crab apple and a rose hip, but they'll have a matte, slightly green colour to them. They won't look anything very much at all. But by September, October, and certainly by the time you get into the proper autumn, so let's say the first half of October, you will start to see the colours of the leaves beginning to change, and the fruit will have fattened up quite substantially. So what may have started as a small half-inch thing in June, July, will probably be, depending on the variety, will be anything from an inch and a half to 2.5 inches across. And it
Almost
will be
the size of a small fist, right? Don't think it
well, some varieties are. So the Dutch monstrous, or the large Dutch, it has both those names, that can end up being about, oh gosh, 3 inches across.
Okay.
And then there's the Iranian, which is I think the most delicious table fruit, which almost looks like a sort of pearl drop earring and is not much bigger than that. So that's about it, that being about an inch across and about an inch and a quarter to an inch and a half long, and with a very different structure. It's much more closed around the sort of sepal calyx side of it, whereas the Dutch monstrous has got really quite an open, well no, actually it's flat, and then you've got the sepals almost closing over. The Nottingham, I always think, looks a little bit like a UFO with quite an opening. That looks particularly like a dog's bottom, I always think, the Nottingham.
So she brings up a point. One of the reasons that the fruit fell out of favor, we think, is because it's quite rude. It's a cul de chien, and Shakespeare uses it in 4 different plays in rather rude connotations. And the Victorians were not fond of the of nicknames that it acquired, and I think it was too much for them to have on the table, and they grew out of fashion, to use a little bit of an oxymoron there. Now I tried up one here. You can kind of see, but this is why we have every plant illustrated in the book, so you can see what it looks like, the branch, the flower, and the fruit. So I'm going to try, and I don't know if this is going to work.
Yeah, I can see that. That looks crikey, it looks really unattractive, doesn't it?
It does look unattractive.
You know, when you are looking on Instagram, I'm sure you've seen people posting images there, and these bare branches with these beautiful fruits hanging off them can be there even into January. It's amazing.
Well, that's another great place to look for medlars, is Instagram, the hashtag medlar. There is another kind that is hashtagged medlar, but it isn't really a medlar. It's not a medlar in the traditional sense that we're talking about it. What you said, what would you call them?
Well, if you're talking about the fruit that you're currently seeing in the Northern Hemisphere being tagged medlar, which is orange, it's the Japanese loquat.
Right. And
that is absolutely nothing botanically to do with medlar. It's a linguistic trick. It's a translation, not an error, that's not the way to put it. But the word nefla, nespola, neflier, nispola has been taken as the word for medlar for good reason, going back hundreds of years. And when you look at the leaves,
heard it here, folks. But one of the things that we thought maybe it's not so much in public parks is because of the fruit falling on the ground. What happens when it falls on the ground?
Well, depending on the situation, and I see this in the city of Norwich actually, where there's a beautiful medlar in the chapter house garden. The tree hangs over the pavement, which is beautiful stone slabs, and I can see how the fruit would sit there if it's not swept up, and it could become a skid pan. So yes, it could be like having yeah, the banana skin effect, which is not desirable.
No,
Um,
no,
not
that's a lawsuit waiting to happen, which is
yeah,
so great where the medlar cluster of medlar trees are behind St. Pancras and behind King's Cross, and by the Word on the Water book barge, is because they're on raised beds, so that really can't happen.
okay.
Good idea. If
Yeah.
you want to plant a medlar anywhere in a public area, you're going to get this amazing sort of progression of color and decor throughout the year, and fruit and slippery quality if you have them.
Yeah, certainly if they're growing in a way that they can hang over a sidewalk or a pavement, as we would call it here. I think that they are deeply desirable to plant in as many different public situations as you can imagine, because they are so instructive. And one of the ways of popularizing anything is to have it available for people to get curious about.
Now, a little Lucio from Measure for Measure from Nick Bombasino.
They would have married me to the rotten medlar.
When I was harvesting in Norwich at the cathedral in November, it took ages because I was stopped and spoken to about every 3 minutes by yet another couple walking their dog or going into the city to do their shopping. What's this? Is it a quince? Can you eat them off the tree? And I thought I should have a little series of signboards just saying, well, you know, this is what it is and this is what you do, all the rest of it. But
well,
actually,
that. What is the flavor is very unique, and I know we have different ways of describing it, but what is your way of describing it?
Oh gosh, the words that spring to mind are sweet but astringent, soft but not mushy, unctuous, which I think is a great word for describing a perfectly bletted medlar that's ready to eat as a table fruit. There are slight notes of apple and cinnamon. When I'm talking to people at the farmers market, the descriptions I get back from them include all of those, plus date, apricot, guava, fig.
Yeah. So it's a difficult fruit to describe because it doesn't taste like anything but what it is.
Exactly.
Just
like quince,
what it is, you're not going to know. I often say apple butter, kind of, but that a lot of the things that you were just saying. So it's a fascinating fruit. Shakespeare was fascinated with it. So let's sort of wind up with this amazing story you told me about. Well, first of all, also please say about what has happened with your orchard.
Well, yes, this is very significant. So in the UK, we have a charity called Plant Heritage, and it's the world's largest plant conservation charity. And there are currently over 630 collections. They're known as national collections. And I have just in the last couple of months received recognition for the orchard as a national collection. It's classed as a horticultural one. And I have currently got 10 of the 11 known cultivars that I would like to have in my collection. The Russian giant is proving difficult to pin down. And what this means is that the orchard is going to be here as an amenity for the people. So in Norfolk, this is the 10th national collection that we have here in the county, but it's the first one of trees. Okay, so it's
first national collection of trees and the first collection of medlars, correct?
There is a combined collection of medlars and quinces in Shropshire, up in Bridgenorth. But this is the this is the first dedicated medlar collection. And as Plant Heritage said in the recognition notice, they said there's no finer way to guarantee the survival and the curation of a rare fruit other than using it to eat. And in fact, that's where the fruit is going. This fruit goes into my products that I make and sell as Eastgate larder, medlar jelly, medlar fruit cheese, spicy chutney, and a large proportion of the fruit will go into a Norfolk Medlar Gin that is being developed by me and Jonathan Redding of Norfolk Gin. This is a very friendly collaboration between equal partners. He's made a beautiful gin, and we're just trying to accent it with something really quirky, and it'll be a single estate, single vintage each year edition of Norfolk Medlar Gin.
That sounds amazing. I know the British people love their gin, but a Medlar gin is sort of quintessentially British. There's a little bit of a Shakespeare flair there.
Oh yes,
yeah, that's something to look forward to. So
you'll have a chance to taste it, I promise, Gerit.
So let's hear the Henry VIII story. I love this.
Okay, well, this is a cracker, isn't it? So Henry VIII, probably. So he was on the throne in the mid 1500s, and famous for his determination to have a son and heir. But when he was obsessed with Anne Boleyn in the late 1520s, early 1530s, he decided to enlist the help of King Francis I of France to help secure the annulment to his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. And as part of his endeavour, he decided that he was going to go across the channel in boats, and he was going to take an enormous Henry VIII style picnic with him to basically to make a feast for Francis I. And so everything was loaded up, and among all the other things, there was poultry of all kinds. So you had ducks and geese and swans, all the things that the Tudors loved. He took with him also 400 dozen pears and 400 dozen medlars. And this really does mark probably the beginning of this fruit becoming not just everyday, but fashionable.
All right, so stay tuned, folks, because we will have a Sherlock Shakespeare medlar hunt in all of our futures, and that will be lovely. And then we can have medlar cheese and jelly and gin.
I'd bring a Norfolk Medlar picnic with me.
Oh, wonderful. That sounds perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to go on a real walk, but I hope you guys feel a little bit of the sense of the outdoors now and are excited to map the medlar.